Hi there. Oh, let me fix my camera there. All right. Hi. Welcome to Storytime Live. I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. I care about that because there can be a lot of harm that happens when people take biblical content and treat it like it's history or treat it as if it's ideas that need to be upheld still today. To cut to the chase on that one. um, Still feeling a little silly, still getting into this new haircut. So if you see me playing with my hair a little more than normal today, that's why we're trying to get used to it here. Today I said I was going to do some more political reading versus spiritualized readings of some of the parables and sayings attributed to Jesus. That will be there next week, or in a couple weeks. Next 2 weeks, actually, I have scholars coming in for conversations. Next week, it'll be on Wednesday instead of Thursday. And then that'll be Dr. Cheryl Anderson, who is a Hebrew Bible scholar. And then the following week, I'm drawing a blank on who it is. It's the 18th, and I can't remember. Oh, yes. No, that'll be Kate Cohen, who wrote the book We of Little Faith. And she is a very interesting person. I'm enjoying her book. And so after that, we'll get back to more of the spiritualized versus political and economic readings, because there's plenty of that to do. Today, I keep meaning to do something like this, and I was just very upset this week when I listened to the way Netanyahu talks, and when I listen to the things that are being said coming from Israel about what's happening in Gaza right now. And I'm actually very teary right now. I don't know if you can tell yet. So I'm going to try to hold it together and say some things, present some ideas, and present some data. I am not a historian. I do not know the whole history of this part of the world. That is not my intention here. I wish I did know more, perhaps I should say, but I don't. And we all choose where we're where we're spending our time and our energy. What I wanted to do is to highlight a few things that do fall in my wheelhouse, right? And walk you through just some stuff, some data today. And it's a form of story time, you could say. And because it's important to me to find a way to say it, even though this isn't me trying to, fix the Middle East for us, the problem in the Middle East. That's not what this is. I'm not, from what I hear, a two-state solution might be good, but the problem with that is the basis on which, the lines are drawn. It's the same thing over and over again, if you ask me. It sounds like it. So what I wanted to do then is so I'm going to present some ideas, bring in how I think about this every day. The things that go through my mind every day when I think about what's going on in Gaza. Yep. And I apparently I might start crying. So, and I realized I didn't put everything in this that I wanted to. And so I'm not sure if in terms of a presentation. So I was trying to, let's see, let me put this in and go ahead and start some of the visuals here that I'm trying to get to instead of just chatting about it. Let's get on with it, right? Let's see, is that going to be better? Maybe we'll see how this goes. And okay, so let's get started. And I'm going to check in as much as I can here on the chat. Oh, yes, thank you, Nitty, for the I didn't put in a little plug. For those of you who are new to this channel, it helps me and it helps others who are like you to find me if you do subscribe and like videos that you find interesting. It's helpful for everyone. It does help me as well. But when you like, subscribe, and share videos with friends, it just helps. The algorithms work pretty well, when you do that, and more people discover the content that I'm doing who might be interested in it. So it's really helpful when you do that. Thank you for that reminder, Nitty. So what I want to do here is, I don't know, these are things I look at all the time and I'm familiar with. So I don't know if you all are familiar with it. When you hear people talking about the Middle East, like, do you have a map in your head? I know that not everybody does have images in their heads. Shocking realization for me to learn just, less than a decade ago. where do you think about it happening? What do you imagine? Where on the planet do you have a way of orienting yourself around this conversation about Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria? Like, do you have a map in your head? How big do you think these regions are, you know? So, the way I come at this content is through a biblical lens. That is where it started for me, and for better and for worse, right? I mean, that's where it was, and then I start learning all the connections, and then you become more political because you realize the connections between these ancient texts and current thoughts, right? So, one of the ways that I tend to teach this content will be at the beginning of a course when I'm doing an intro to either of the primary testaments for the Christian Bible, the Hebrew Bible or the Newer Testament, and I'll do kind of an overview of the storyline, because I think the overview of the storyline is, at least the Hebrew Bible, is important for the Hebrew Bible course, but you need to have that to also do intro to the Newer Testament. And one of the things that we talk about when we talk about the Hebrew Bible and the narrative of the Hebrew Bible is we do refer to this thing called the Fertile Crescent. And there's a lot you could look up about this, but when you look at the ancient what this framework of ancient Near East, the label of ancient Near East is problematic in and of itself, right? Where's the center for that to be East? It is European or British, yes. Okay. All these points noted, right? But if you look at, the ancient languages and the ancient people, right? Akkadian, Assyrian, these people, Sumerian, these ancient peoples that long predate the people that become the Hebrews and the Israelites, right? They have languages and laws and systems and ideas going on long before we get to the people, right? The Hebrew people and Israelites. And we talk about this swath of land, and sometimes the Fertile Crescent just like that one, comes down and includes Egypt. So Lower Egypt is a part of it closer to the Mediterranean Sea, and Upper Egypt is farther down here. But the Fertile Crescent, right? This part of the world, there's a lot of desert going on over here, and there's a lot of fertile land over here. And when you start thinking about things like trade routes, this swath of land, right, is kind of important if you're trying to get from over here to Egypt, right? There is something important about this piece of land over the centuries, right? And the people who become the Hebrew people, who are then the Israelites, who then become the Jews, who, right, that there's a general thread connecting all these people in terms of their ancestry. But where did those people actually come from initially is much more complicated than the biblical storyline suggests. So okay, so when we're looking at a map like this, what I think of is I start thinking about the biblical narrative, which, again, that's where I come from, that's my background, and I think about it through different lenses now than I did before growing up. But the story goes, right? It starts with this guy Abram, who he and his family are from the city of which is over here. Do you all see my cursor when I do that? I'm assuming you do. Um, so yeah, the city of is kind of the location of where Abram and his family begin, and they head, yes, because it's at the center of, oh, okay. It's always money. Follow the money. Oh, you do not see my cursor, Ruben. Thank you for letting me know that. Okay. Very interesting. Thank you, April. Okay. Fascinating. Is it because it's too small and you don't? Okay. I appreciate that. Is it because it's too small or? Interesting. All right. Well, so is over at over near the Persian Gulf. That you see the city of It's it's in the Sumerian region, if you will. And so Abraham and his family head kind of northwest, essentially in the Fertile Crescent direction, and then back over toward Palestine. So they move they start over here in Sumeria, or what is more generally thought of as the Mesopotamian region, which is, um, Mesopotamia. This is one of those. Oh, I love doing this class, just this one in person because we can do all the things. But Mesopotamia, you take the name Mesopotamia and you pull it apart. You have Meso, which is middle. If any of you are singers, the mezzo soprano, the middle soprano, middle range. Also like mezzanine, right? Those words, those kinds of words. So Mesopotamia, and the way I remember Potamia, potamus, is hippopotamus. What is a hippopotamus? It's a river horse. Hippo, horse, potamus, river. So Mesopotamus, middle of the rivers, the land between the two great rivers, Euphrates and Tigris, right? So all of the, the Assyrians, the Akkadians, Sumerian, all of that history, there's a reason why people like Josh Bowen and Kip Davis and Matt Monger got into studying that history, because it predates what leads into and helps to create the people of Israel and so forth. So this is the map that I kind of start with and I think about. And so yes, the region that we're talking about today, and I have another map, we'll look at another one as well, is right wherever on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, where it says Palestine. And if you look at the cities there's Jericho and Jerusalem. We can't label everything because it's, this map is too big. But Jericho and Jerusalem, kind of important cities from a Hebrew Bible perspective, as well as from a Newer Testament perspective. And then you can see Asia Minor here. And this isn't interesting. This map itself is kind of distorted in terms of size, because Asia Minor is pretty significant. And what else do I want to say here? So part of what I'm trying to highlight here, before we move on to some more data and dates and things and people and whatever, is to focus in on how small this territory is that we're talking about. When you look at, again, I don't know why Iran is listed on here, because it's not Iran yet, but anyway, I can't remember where I got this map, and I got it probably 15 years ago. And when you're piling things together really fast, it's just, you take whatever you can get and hope you remember to, cite the source. But what am I trying to say? Big pieces of land, lots of desert. I'm really interested in you thinking about, this isn't the largest, this isn't a very big territory. It's really fascinating how profoundly sacred this strip of land is because of the biblical narratives. I don't think it is possible to overstate the importance of the biblical narrative having been taken as history and as actual things that God actually pronounced. I don't think it's possible to overstate the importance of those ways of reading the Bible in terms of the current crisis, in terms of understanding how we got to the current crisis, understanding what's driving it, why it's so difficult to unpack and address, all of those things. Okay. So I will, okay, I'm going to, might not be included in the screen share. Some sharing software allows to choose whether. Oh, that's interesting. Back to the cursor. I appreciate your input there, folks. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. And so, just so you know, right, we're talking about the land just to the west of the Jordan River, Dead Sea, all that, just on, kind of that sliver. We're not talking about a huge swath of land here. This is similar map, a little bit more, I guess it's just more basic, and sometimes it's not enough. There aren't enough things to hang on to look at this one. So we're not going to stay on that for too long. Okay. So when I think about the 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 land that we're talking about. I start with my sense of this story about Abraham, right? And if we're gonna give some dates, we go back about 1800 BCE when he left his hometown and moved northwest or west. And so you have you've got 1,000 years, sort of, to talk about how we get from this one guy and his woman and his nephew leaving, well, and his family, and leaving home, and then leaving some behind in Haran and moving on. So we have, this pioneering spirited man claiming land, claiming that God has promised him and his descendants a specific swath of land, but there are already people living there. Okay? So literally from the beginning, like this is an like you can't overstate the importance here. You just can't. From the very start, we have a man claiming as his own, according to the narrative, a land that is already occupied. Okay? And that's I'm gonna go back to looking at this fun map while I talk about this. No, let's take this out for just a second. Okay. So we have this storyline, and I have all these other PowerPoint presentations, and I'm sorry, I just didn't consolidate them all to bring all the visuals together. But there's a story to tell from 1800 BCE over to the first date that was listed in the Assyrians, kind of being the occupiers of this territory. There's a story to tell, right? You talk about Abraham and that horrific event where he forces himself on the enslaved person in there, Hagar. I did a little pulled a clip from that particular story time from last summer. There are many elements of this biblical storyline that need to be challenged, actually, like, people be aware of and then challenge because of the staying power here, right? And the worldview out of which all these texts and claims come, and therefore how dysfunctional the relationships are, how um unthoughtful the premises are, right? If retrospectively, people are several hundred years later are writing the story of Abraham, right? It's not like the story of Abraham was written at the time that guy lived, right? We've got multiple centuries between whoever that guy was, if there was one, right? And then the writing of the story, 2020 hindsight, right? And the need to be able to establish themselves as a group of people, to be able to survive, because there are constantly people coming through who are conquering the area, who are, putting them in, taking some form of occupying, right? There are people already living there, others stronger, more resourceful, more well established, come through and conquer the territory and take control of it. But the people living there don't get to run things for themselves. And so you have this ongoing struggle of the people who are of the land do not get to run it for themselves. That is at the heart of this whole narrative. The problem is this guy Abraham got to make some claims, and the way things played out over the centuries, people keep turning back to those promises given to Abraham. The promises are relatively three. I mean, they change and they grow, and they start out as unconditional, and then they become conditional, and that's when the laws come in, right? But the unconditional promises start out as, I will give you a certain swath of land, I will make your descendants numerous, and I will make you a great nation, meaning not just a lot of people, but that you'll be established on your own so that you can reach out to and be a contender, be a political contender in the midst of all of these big, regions or states or countries or whatever you want to call them, empires that are ruling this part of the world. You're going to get to be a contender among them. And so if you think about if you think about people living in the region of between like Phoenicia and Jerusalem, and that's where the people are coming from that end up being the Hebrew people, the Israelite people, that this region, this coastal region, or maybe some of them come from Egypt, right? I mean, it's a conversation to have. It's not a clear-cut situation. But this is a small group of people wanting to be established. And, Abraham, the first 11 chapters of Genesis are referred to as primeval history. They should be primeval mythology, but they're called primeval history. But they're chapters that are talking about, go be fruitful, fill the earth, right? Multiply, fill the earth. Why is it your neighbors speak different languages than you do? All those kinds of things, right? And so we have all these stories that explain and justify all of these, kind of setting the stage. And then you have Abram and his woman Sarai, and he pimps her out to get some goods from the Pharaoh, and that goes well for them and because of her. And then they head back towards the land that Abram has been promised. Initially, the swath of land looks more like the Fertile Crescent, and it ends up being just a very slim piece. And then you have several generations in the book of Genesis that narrate, his son Isaac is kind of lukewarm, like he doesn't do much that's very interesting. But then Rebecca has twins, and that's where things get interesting, right? Isaac and Esau, excuse me, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob being the trickster and wada, yada, yada, all kinds of stuff going on. All kinds of interesting familial dynamics. And then we have the sons that become the tribes, the heads of the tribes of Israel. So one of the questions that arises for people is where did the people who become the Israelite tribes, where did they come from? Because the story says they are the descendants of Abraham. So his grandson is the father of the 12 tribes. There's 13 men involved. It doesn't matter. Sons involved. It doesn't really matter. So Abraham's great-grandsons are the heads of the tribes. Where did they and their people, where did they all come from? And when you start, so the story says that then great-grandsons, one of them, several of them gang up against their least favorite sibling and sell him into slavery. And so Joseph goes off to Egypt and helps them survive a famine. It's great lore, right? But then they end up, the rest of the family, moving down there because of a famine where they'd been living, right? And then there's the story says it's 400 years that they're there enslaved, and their labor's exploited, because that's what happens when you're the immigrant, right? And they finally cry out because it becomes too harsh on them, and that's when you get the story of the Exodus from Egypt. So none of this is historically accurate, but it's the storyline that we have to work with, and it's the story that people believe, right? That's the thing. It's the story that people believe. And so I'm just wondering if I can pull up the image, if I could find that PowerPoint really fast, because hang on a second. Gosh, this is so ridiculous this thing. Okay, let me see what I can find really quickly here. I meant to do this before and I didn't, so we're going to see about. Hang with me. I don't think it's that one. I think it's a different one. Yada yada. Okay. It's not that one. It's not that one. Okay, wait. Nope. Okay, that's all just interesting stuff. Okay. I appreciate you giving me a chance here. Hang with me. Terms, that's too late in the term. This might be it. And I don't have the images here. Okay, so shoot. Nope. Nope. That's not it. Oh dear, that's way too late. Okay. So, all right, I have this, and I can't remember where it is. I have this really great image of that depicting this issue of, thanks for bearing with me, this really great framework for trying to show a visual of using one of the maps that I have in this presentation, and showing that people that migrated to the region that's called Canaan in the Hebrew Bible, that territory that we're talking about is called Canaan, and that the people living in the region of Canaan, there are waves of people that have, over the centuries, right, from throughout the Mediterranean world or the ancient Near East, people have kind of in waves and over time come from various locations to that location. And so they've brought with them Egyptian influences and Hittite influences from Asia Minor, and other Persian and other Assyrian and Babylonian influences with them when they relocated to that small slither of land that we're talking about here. So that when the people that do come together as Israelites, not to be confused with Israelis, Israeli is just the country of Israel was established in 1947 or 48. That's when you can start using the word Israeli. Israelites are the people in the Hebrew Bible. And the people that come together, now I'm talking historically, I'm not talking about in terms of the biblical narrative, I'm talking historically. Those are the narrative that makes the most sense to me in terms of what actually happened is that there were people already living in that swath of land, and some of them decided to band together against the others. And there are multiple theories, right, to explain where the people of Israel come from. And this is the most, I would say it's the most reasonable. It's the, what do we call it? I haven't looked at it recently. So you have the conquest theory, and that's the book of Joshua. That's the most miraculous and ridiculous and fantastic, right? It's nothing about that's realistic. You have the conquest, you have gradual emergence. That's the one I think makes most sense. You have these other kind of theories, and then you have the peasant revolt. So kind of this small group of people, maybe some fleeing Egypt, come into that region and spark a revolt. And I think there's some sort of combination of that and the gradual emergence that makes the most sense to me. My point here, and this actually is really important, the reason I'm trying to talk about this so much up front, is because when you look at the narrative of the Hebrew Bible, people take the narrative of Joshua, for instance, and the book of Exodus, take that fairly as if it's literal or as if it's historical, and they claim those claims. They claim the promises given to Abraham, that this particular swath of land will be theirs. They will be numerous. They will get to rule themselves. They come into the land and just conquered everything, and everybody, they got rid of everybody or everything, and then this is where we're settling because God promised it to us. And people have been reading that narrative as if it really took place, and therefore have been trying to work towards making those promises come to fruition ever since those stories were written down. So you get to the year, again, in this general narrative framework thing, you have in the year 1200 or so BCE is when that miraculous Exodus, parting of the waters, all that taking place. Another 150 years or so of trying to settle, actually, the story says they go in and conquer everybody, and then the book of Judges says, no, they didn't conquer everybody. They didn't destroy everybody or kick everybody out. So we have two stories back to back. They contradict each other. And the book of Judges is the one saying, oh, they actually just kind of settled in and tried to take over, and they're having a hard time because they keep being drawn back to worshiping these other gods, because that's, historically speaking, were their gods. They had just been worshiping them. And so the effort on the part of the biblical writers to create this narrative that we're only worshiping this one God, right? And doing it this way, and that this God is, we're the chosen ones, chosen people of this God, all of that. These claims, the general claims are held on to. And when I say that, what I mean is I've had students, in the last decade who grew up in Israel, and they have told me that this is our land. God promised it to us. That they grew up being told over and over, those promises to Abraham are theirs to claim. And I know I've spoken of this person before, once probably on somewhere on one of my live streams. I had a very intelligent, very brave, very courageous student who was willing to consider with me and the rest of the class what she had been taught as a Jewish young woman, right? Now living in the United States, but, Hebrew's her first language, right? And she and I met separately to try to talk some things through and to try to talk about the extent to which what she had been taught about the need for a country for the Jews, the way that was talked about. And here's the thing, this is why I tried to do a whole bunch of caveats up front. It's complicated. The threat to destroy a particular country, Israel, right, from destroying them, like Iranians trying to get rid of, I realize it is very complicated, but I'm just trying to talk about the biblical claims and how those function. Okay, so for instance, in these exchanges with this young woman, she's now in medical school, she would tell me, I'm just afraid. I'm afraid I need a place to feel safe. And the interesting thing there, of course, is that it isn't going to be in Israel. That's the thing. That's never going to feel safe at this point. Anyway, so I hope you're hearing my point, which is to connect in a very real way claims being made today, April 4th, 2024, over a piece of land. They are rooted in these promises given to Abraham that start in the 12th chapter of Genesis. And they are repeated and returned to and claimed and owned and claimed and were talked about over and over and over and over again throughout the narrative of the Hebrew Bible. That this is this swath of land that God has promised to you and your descendants. Okay. This is probably a really good time for me to point out, if you're watching this and you don't know this about me, I get just as weepy. I've gotten a little bit more in my head now as I've started talking, but I get just as weepy when I think about the anti-Judaic content of the Newer Testament. It is powerful. It is horrific, in my opinion, and I am not alone on that. So this isn't me being anti-Israel. This isn't me being anti-Judaic. This is me talking about the premise here is faulty. And just like that premise is faulty because it was just a claim that a bunch of people made, right, to claim this land. It's really kind of sneaky and underhanded, right? The same thing happens for me when I talk about the Newer Testament, when I talk about the texts of the Newer Testament, the ideas that are found there, especially by the end of the writings that come from the end of the first century. And then you start looking in the first couple centuries of after the writings of the Newer Testament are completed, but you still have a whole bunch of ferment going on in terms of trying to decide ideas and there's a lot of anti-Judaic content in the early Christian church that I was not aware of until I went to seminary. So I get just as weepy over that. So I want you all to understand, right? This is me seeing the implications of these ancient texts and how they have played out for harm, justifying a near genocide, right? So there's a thread that connects the Newer Testament writings to the, throughout the church development, leading up to the Reformation, leading up to Martin Luther's, some of his horrific claims about Jews that sound very much like Glasnost. Like it's just all, when you get to this near genocide in the 20th century, there's a string that connects all of those events that start in the Newer Testament. Okay, so that for me, those events are connected, and so it's complicated. It is complicated. I'm going to keep moving now at this point and do some more of this kind of content. So when I just saw somebody reference England, and so yeah, let me get to that part. So when I think, as a biblical scholar, I think about the occupiers of the land that we're referring to, right? Just that little sliver of land, right? And I think of it through what is the narrative, even though I know the narrative isn't historically accurate, it's a framework for me to work with, right? And so but we do know that these are historical events in terms of the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians. So the narrative itself, the details, I'm not here for that. But this general sense of the Assyrians having, which is kind of, over in the Tigris, Euphrates, Mesopotamian region, they kind of come in and conquer that region, but including the people involved in the Hebrew Bible, which from my perspective, that's how I learned about it, right? It's, okay, the story is being told by the people who wrote the Hebrew Bible. So of course there's a bias here, okay? But the Assyrians conquer. 722, they conquer the northern kingdom, the northern territories, if you will. And then the seat of power just kind of starts to move southeast. So Assyrians were conquered by the Babylonians 150 years later, right? And the Babylonians come in from the southern direction, and they, in all the other things they're conquering, but then they're the ones who level the massive temple in Jerusalem. So the temple that Solomon is attributed with building is in around 920, 915, 920. 950. I get the dates. Sorry, I get the dates confused. Around 950, I guess. That was leveled, all, destroyed by the Babylonians in 587. And that's when if you've heard about the Babylonian exile, that's when that starts to take place. And they go off so people from the southern kingdom, Judah, are carried off into exile. So plenty of people are left behind in the territory that we're talking about, right? So by the 6th century BCE, who are these people who belong to the land, who are descendants of people who have always belonged to the land? Well, descendants of people who've moved a millennia ago from Egypt, 500 years ago from Asia Minor. Do you see what I'm saying? People settling in that part of the land come from all over the place, but then they have generations of family, of people, right? And Syrians coming in, and there's a big battle, and people are destroyed and carried off into exile into Assyria. And who cares about them? Because we're telling the story from the position of the people in the south. And then people in the south are carried off by the Babylonians, and this is the worst event ever to have transpired. It's also pretty significant that the temple's destroyed. But there are still people living in that part of the world, even though some are carried off into exile. And then you have the Persians take over, so the seat of power moves a little bit farther southeast, and and that's when they help rebuild that temple that was destroyed. So 538, to give it about 20 years to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. That's the Second Temple period, if you've ever heard people refer to that. And that Second Temple period ends at the end of the war between the Jews and the Romans in 66 to 70 Common Era. So another, 600 years later. And then we keep moving, right? Historically speaking, we keep telling the story. The Greeks are then, Alexander the Great and all that, conquering the whole ancient Mediterranean region and all the way over to India. Like, okay, so now someone else is in control. And then the Romans take over, 250 years later. And so the swath of land that I tried to highlight for you, since I didn't realize my cursor wasn't working, you couldn't see my cursor. The swath of land keeps changing who is ruling over it, but they're the people who live there, their descendants, right? People are coming and going from that piece of land as well, right? At various points in time, people choose to leave, right? We refer to that as the diaspora, when you are from a particular place and you choose to leave that place, right? And it's initially used to talk about the people, this chosen people, right? God's chosen people. So let me back up a little bit and say it's at the point when the Persians send people who want to return to the promised land with the resources to rebuild their temple. That's when the use of the term Jew begins. It's at this point in time. So the second temple period. So comes from the name Judah, one of the sons. So prior to that, they were Israelites. Prior to being called Israelites, they were Hebrew people, and it's all kind of murky, there for several hundred years. So Romans, and then we get the Byzantines. So the Romans are in control of this region for 300 years almost, right? Yeah. And then the Byzantines, and I'm chuckling because 325 is the date of the first ecumenical council, and I just stopped paying attention after the Romans because I'm a New Testament. My focus is on New Testament, and I knew the Byzantines were next. I couldn't tell you the next few slides of names. Okay. It's not in my wheelhouse, and I have other things to focus my energy and memorization on. But here's the thing, folks, the people that are living in that strip, that territory, they're people of the land. It doesn't matter who's coming through as occupiers. You still, people might be changing over in that part of the world, but there might still also be some who don't. I don't know. It's a small strip, but it's also the land that people are fighting over because of this city, Jerusalem, right? So, there's one of the parables of one of the things attributed to Jesus is this line, "The meek shall inherit well, I always heard it, the earth," as if there was some form of kingdom element going on. But what I think is interesting is it's perhaps best to think of it as the meek shall inherit the land. And I wonder how that changes things for you. If you were to think, if you can, think about first century Galilee, Judah, like first century Judah, like those regions. And the issue is actually the land, being able to claim the land, because that gets you back to these promises of being able to establish yourselves, reasonable desires. Right? I just want to be clear about that. I think it is a very reasonable desire to want to be able to not be terrified by all these peoples coming through wanting to control your land, right? So this issue is about the land. It always has been. But who is it that gets to make a claim on that land? And there hasn't ever been until the 20th century, those claims given to Abraham never all came to fruition at the same time. They were never hugely numerous. They didn't ever control that piece of land on their own. So, okay, let's just keep moving. I think I'm making my point, and I'm just going to keep moving. And I think this is an interesting, like, pop quiz, does anybody know who's next? And I bet there's some of you here, like, in the chat or watching later who actually do know these groups of people and the progression over time. I don't. Like, I had to go look it up. So we have we have Arabs, and, gosh, this is a point in time, right, where this is early Muslim days and, 637. It's all very complicated, right? When you say Arab, at this point, at this point in time, do you mean Muslim? Do you mean some other Zoroastrian? Do you mean what kind of religion are you talking about when you talk about Arab? Because Arab is not a religion, right? It's a people ethnic label. So it's really fascinating to me because even today, when people talk about an Arab nation, or a Jewish, an Arab state and a Jewish state, those aren't the same qualifiers, right? Jewish is religious and cultural, ethnic. Arab can be Jewish, Muslim, Christian, nothing in terms of religion. So it's complicated, right? You have the Tartars in 1040, and yes, I saw someone referring to the Crusaders in 1095, the first Christian-driven crusade in 1095. And the Ayyubids, Ayyubids, obviously this isn't in my wheelhouse, but Ayyubids. So again, back in Muslim hands, 1187, and then Tartars again, 1244, Mamluks. So these are all people from what is that, I'm just not going to say anymore. I'm going to let you look it up if you want to go look into it. Mongols in 1400, so early 15th century for 100 years or so. The Ottomans in control for quite a bit of time, 1516 up until the end of the First World War. So what happens next from my perspective in this conversation, this is where I'm presenting some pieces of the picture and you get to do what you're going to do with it. Okay. I also want to comment that, again, I want to remind you that I am not, I am concerned about anti-Judaic content of the Newer Testament, of the Christian tradition, of Christian ideas, of Christian theology, of Christian history. And I am concerned about people using these biblical texts as if they are to be read literally, as if they're historical, as if the claims made that God promised Abraham a certain piece of land, as if that's something we have to acknowledge, we have to honor. That's what my concern is here. Okay. I want to make sure you all hear that. So this is not me saying anything about what I, do away with. That's not what this is. Okay. I'm not trying to say do away with. I'm trying to talk about the power of texts. Okay. And their continuing influence on people's beliefs and ideas and the way they think about the world. Okay. I've given this screen a lot of times. Let me move past this. But the World Zionist Organization began at the end of the 19th century, right? And there, again, all of these, there's a lot to look into. None of this is simple, straightforward. But Theodore Herzl was important because of the book he wrote, the Alt Noise, so the Old New Land, in 1902. And so this idea of Zionism, and most of the content that I have drawn from today comes from the UN, the United Nations website. I did consult one Palestinian informational website. And I just need to also say that it's hard. It's really hard to know who to trust in terms of everybody has a bias. I know that. And I do too. And I trusted the Council on Foreign Relations, and in the fall, right after the attack on October 7th. And I trusted them, and I misrepresented some of the Palestinian struggle because of that, because of the people in that group, those think tanks or whatever, having probably an unacknowledged Christian bias. That let me get off this slide before I just have a little chit chat here. So Zionism, this concept of Zion, that's a reference to the city of Jerusalem, and so that's that is particular to Judaism, to think about Jerusalem as Zion and to try to get back to some sort of point in time where their ancestors, according to the narrative, right, lived and kind of had control of that land. So Zionism seeks to establish a home for the Jewish people in Palestine secured under public law. Just that idea is based on taking the biblical narrative, the promises to Abraham, to heart uncritically. I hope you can see what I mean by that. And I had another tangent I was trying to clarify something about and didn't want to have that World Zionism organization up any longer. So I lost my train of thought. It'll probably come back to me. So at the end of the First World War in 1917, that's when we have the British who are occupying or trying to have, it's a nicer name than that, and I have it on the next slide or two, but so with the Balfour Declaration of 1917. So I'm just going to finish this particular slide or two, right? And then in 1947-48 is when the United Nations tried to establish or create the state of Israel. And that's when you can start using the word Israeli, and none of this is unproblematic. Okay, so the Balfour Declaration, 1917, I'd recommend there's a Britannica website that has a lot of content. The UN, I was drawing from the UN's website, so I know there's a bias there. I think they tried to be pretty fair, but there's a bias in favor of Israel to a certain degree because of the tradition, because of the religious history here of Christianity coming out of Judaism and this, all the things. It's just so complicated, messy. But United States tends to side with Israel, not just now, but historically. Anyway, so messy. So the League of Nations, right? So 1917, we haven't created United Nations yet. League of Nations decision was to place Palestine under the administration of Great Britain as the mandatory power. I mean, it's a babysitter, right? And the intention was to create some security, create some stability so that Palestine could become an independent nation. The problem is, so this is pulled straight from the UN website, and it was going to be easier to just read it with you slowly than to, just it's going to be easier to read it with you. I'm going to do, nope, let's do that. The decision on the mandate. So this is we're still talking about we're talking about this mandate, right? 1917. So the decision on the mandate did not take into account the wishes of the people of Palestine. Despite the covenants, that's the language they use for this declaration. Despite the covenants requirements that, quoting from that declaration, the wishes of these communities, meaning those already living in Palestine, must be a principal consideration in the selection of the mandatory. There's things going on already that I don't know all the specifics of. So let's just roll with it for now. Just kind of have the general idea going on here, right? So this took on special significance because almost 5 years before receiving the mandate from the League of Nations, so 1912, the British government had given commitments to the Zionist organization regarding the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine, for which Zionist leaders had pressed a claim of, and this doesn't have my formatting because in my slideshow I have the next couple lines bolded. That's fine. It doesn't come through. That's fine. They pressed a claim of, quote, historical connection. Do you see the problem here? People living in the year 1912 are claiming a historical connection to the people living since their ancestors had lived in Palestine 2,000 years earlier before dispersing in the diaspora. If you didn't grow up in a Jewish family or a Christian family, this probably sounds like the most bizarre thing ever. My family lived in 2,000 years ago, and so we're gonna claim it? The only reason that made any sense at all, at the beginning of the 20th century, to the Zionists as well as to the people in the British government is because of the biblical narrative. There is nothing else to explain that ridiculous claim. But because people, right, this is important, and the colonizers of the globe, predominantly fueled by the Christian tradition, right? Okay. Is everybody tracking with the problematic nature of what's going on here? And they're, the claim to parts of Jerusalem through Islamic, through Islamic claims, from my perspective, they're all just claims people are making up, right? And then destroying other lives based on it. Like, none of it's fair. None of it's legit, right? So when you have the, pretty significant buildings for the three monotheistic traditions right in the same city of Jerusalem, you have all of these people having your religious connection, your religious heritage is connected to this city, There's a reason it's intense. Okay, let's go. Why did that show up bold and the other didn't? Anyway, so this is also from that same website, the same UN website. So from 1948, there have been wars and destruction, forcing millions of Palestinians into exile. This is the content that runs through my mind and has been running through my mind since October 7. The people of that part of the world have been forced to relocate time and again by outsiders coming in and telling them they can't live there anymore. Wars and destruction, and engaging the United Nations in a continuing search for a solution to the problem, which came to possess the potential of a major source of danger for world peace. That this sliver of land is the linchpin in world peace. It ought to make every single one of us pause. Like, why is that? What's going on here on this piece of land that world peace hinges upon it, right? We're talking about religious convictions and beliefs. We're talking about outmoded, outdated, ancient ways of thinking, and people not being given more informed ways of understanding these scriptures that are sacred to them. You can read these scriptures without believing that God actually promised Abraham that piece of land. Like, you don't have to, that doesn't have to be the throwdown point, but it is because of the way people are taught, and the countless number of people in positions of power, not just in Israel, but in Britain, in European Union positions, all in the United States, for God's sake, right? So this is people who have not interrogated for themselves what the Bible is and is not, are in particular in Western cultures, are most likely to get swept up in this idea of this placement of Israel where it has been trying to be placed. And to me, it makes perfect sense why these things happened. And it took me reading someone's book who I hesitate to point it out because he's got some very difficult language in terms of anti-Judaism without just pointing out the biblical content. So it's a difficult one for me to refer to. But this person helped me see for the first time. I mean, it was 2000. When did I first encounter it? 2009, 2006. When was it published? Oh God, even more recently than that. I think it wasn't until 2015 that I saw that. So, gosh, I thought it was earlier than that. Anyway, it must have been a second. Anyway, the point is, when you have this happen, okay, post World War II, people are freaking out because there was a near genocide, right? Of not just of Jewish people, but we had other groups of people also being attacked and treated as non-humans. It's really hard. It's hard. Okay. So the Christian guilt over the Holocaust, right, is a major motivation in this whole deliberation. Okay. But it isn't at a level that's actually going to address the problems. People play nicey nice and we're going to get along instead of looking at the roots of the problem, right? Anyway, nobody's asking me. And it's probably good that they don't. So back to 1947, the United Nations vote. So the vote took place the end of November. The Resolution 181. You can look all this up online. This isn't me bringing something new to the table here. The United Nations, right, had a Resolution 181 was to partition Palestine into an Arab state and a Jewish state. That's why I pointed out just a minute ago. These are not apples and apples, right? These are, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is Arab, which is ethnic, but heavily Muslim, and Jewish, which is Jewish, although sometimes culturally, but predominantly in that part of the world, at least, very Jewish. But there are Christians and Jews living in Palestine. So even at this point in time, 1947, this partition into Arab state and Jewish state is not an accurate description to begin with, right? Okay. The vote lasted 3 minutes to pass this vote, and this was driven by, and the resolution, as you can see, I'm sorry to put a whole bunch of content up, but the resolution required Palestinians to give up more than half of their land for the creation of the Jewish state. And one of the things that was quite motivating and persuasive for people in the UN in that vote, okay? So people representing various parts of the northern hemisphere, right? so many things going on here that we could talk about. The people in that vote on the United Nations committee or whatever that passed Resolution 181 were significantly influenced by this claim, which is unfounded. Okay, this line from Alt Neuland. A land without a people for a people without a land. Now, okay, so this is being quoted or whatever. I just don't want to have that on the up for very long. 1947, a couple years after World War II, and there is a dilemma. Where is it safe for these people, this particular group of people, to live? That element, I'm not trying to dismiss that element, the fear, the legitimate fear, all of those pieces, right? I understand that was very real. I'm not challenging that, right? But to say that this is a people without a land, I think that's legit. But saying that the land didn't have a people is total BS, okay? So there are people already living there. In fact, take a deep breath. Here we go. Operation Broom, so labeled because it was intended to sweep 250,000 Palestinians out of their homes to make room for the Jewish state. Operation Broom. Are you kidding me? It's so disgusting. I can hardly even stand it. Like, I can't even. Okay. So in October, so another almost a full year after they passed the resolution 181 is when this took place. And there are plenty of things out there you can access. One of the videos that again, you got to take it all with a grain of salt, and I worry about what I might be unintentionally perpetuating, and in terms of these kinds of things, because it is so difficult and complicated. But there is a documentary, I think it is PBS documentary, called The Stones Cry Out, and it is being told from Christian Palestinian perspective about this event and the fallout from it, and how some of the farmers here were told, you need to leave your home for 2 weeks, and then 3 years later, they're still living in whatever makeshift places they can manage, watching others living in their homes. And then there's an air raid that destroys, this particular village. They watch Israeli military destroy their village, like all kinds of crazy, ridiculous stuff. So there's a book called The Lemon Tree, which is really helpful in terms of talking about the issue that developed here in 1948 when they tried to make room for the Jewish state, and how that impacted people, right? And people were forced out of their homes. Other people came in and claimed them. And now you've got, I mean, and it's a beautifully written, very well researched, supported. I didn't include the guy's name. I have a whole bunch of resources here at the end that I have, but The Lemon Tree is the main title, and it's fantastic. And it's complicated. Okay. All right. I have the source listed here on this map. Just to be clear, thepeoplesvoice.org is not one that if I could have, I would have, if I'd had time, I would have whited that out. That is not a website I would like to encourage people to visit, but I'd found this elsewhere, and I have to admit, I just didn't have time to research to discover. So it's close enough for now. It's terrible, but it's making the point that I'm trying to make, that I want you to think about. So the British mandate, so up until 1947, under the British mandate, right, that began with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, the green in the left-hand map, the green is Palestinian area and the white is Jewish. After the UN resolution signed at the end of 1948, right, that is how things shifted, right? So sweeping people out to create the white space, right, is what happened with Operation Broom in 1948. So farther than what was established by the UN plan, the second map. And then the next 20 years. And then in 1967 is when you have the Nakba, which was another attack, another horrific day for Palestinians, and Israeli raid on Egypt and Syria air forces, Syrian air forces, and then taking over more land, so that the fourth map in 2010, Israel and occupied Palestinian land, right? And then Palestinian land. So these are not pieces I know how to well tease out. That is not my intention here. I'm trying to show you the basic premise here about the issue is the land. Who is it that gets to claim it and why? And when you have someone saying that my ancestors from 2000, my biblical text tells me, and my ancestors 2000, right? And we've had this claim, and this is our claim. I just want you to think about the role that the biblical text is playing in justifying these claims and backing up something like Operation Broom. You have there were other places on the planet that were considered for establishing the Jewish state, right? I mean, it's arbitrary in a sense, but they chose this particular land because of the connection to the biblical text. It makes the most sense because, of course, all kinds of things, right? There is this 6-day war is how it is referred to. If you're not Palestinian, Palestinians tend to refer to it as the Nakba, which is, I can't remember the word that it's the terror, something like that. So 5 days in June, and the result of that is further claim on land by Israeli forces. Pretty significant and important land and territories. And then because we're all familiar with the name Hamas at this point, in the fall, as taking the lead of the Council on Foreign Relations committees and their experts that they were interviewing, that was what I was doing, and I regret that to a certain extent because of. Well, let's look at these slides. That'll explain it, I think. I was trying to remember the name of the documentary that looks at why Palestinians throw rocks, and some of the work being done trying to bridge, between the two peoples. So in 2000, the West Bank separation wall, mostly within occupied Palestinian territory, was ruled illegal by the International Court of Justice. But this wall began, and it is stunningly arbitrary at times, and it will cut you off from other people in your own neighborhood at times, and it makes it impossible to get from here, from one Palestinian region area to another at times, and you have these checkpoints, and your life is being controlled and moderated and monitored in ways that I just cannot relate to. And it's day-to-day life is about checkpoints. And so this separation wall, right, ruled illegal, but still got to continue because Israel wanted to. I mean, in 2002, the Security Council, this is UN Security Council, affirmed a vision of two states, Israel and Palestine. Again, my question there, is going to be who gets to, and they talk about Jerusalem being international territory so that nobody has exclusive rights to it, which is why I almost, my head almost exploded when former president acknowledged Jerusalem as belonging to the state of Israel. Okay. 2002, Security Council affirmed a vision, two states. The Arab League adopted the Arab Peace Initiative. And Arab League, right, this starts, now we're talking about Arab peoples and various nations that are Arab and therefore primarily Muslim, but, and so you have this Arab Muslim versus Jewish dynamic going on behind all this politics, which is just beyond my, purview. In 2003, the Quartet, which is a way of referring to United States, European Union, Russia, and the United Nations, released a roadmap and a two-state solution, which is so, all these outside people making these things happen. An official Geneva Peace Accord was promulgated by prominent Israelis and Palestinians. Okay, I'm just quoting directly from the UN website here. More recently, in 2005, Israel withdrew its settlers, right, and troops from Gaza while retaining control over its borders, seashore, and airspace. So you just think about that for a moment. This is why people were, pointing out that this people living in Gaza for the last nearly 20 years have been dealing with this kind of control, oppression, right? So I'm not sure how direct to be or how much of this to say, but Netanyahu knew what he was doing, and he's provoking on purpose. So that when something like October 7, in a sense, finally happens because it's bad for them, he is gets away with making it sound like this is an unprovoked attack. October 7. This is ridiculous. It's not unprovoked. And and so following Palestinian legislative elections of 2006, the quartet, so United States, European Union, Russia, and United Nations, conditioned assistance to the Palestinian Authority on its commitment to nonviolence, recognition of Israel, and acceptance of previous agreements. There's so much going on here. So, and then after an armed takeover of Gaza by Hamas in 2007, Israel imposed a blockade. So even this language, right? An armed takeover of Gaza by Hamas. So this is likely written by someone influenced by the biblical narrative of protecting Israel, because even though that's probably what happened, there's more to understanding why that happened than simply stating that this is what happened. Right? This event in 2007 didn't happen in a bubble, right? I'm, again, not trying to endorse or say that I'm in favor of violence or anything of the sort. I'm just, all of the pieces, I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that I don't know all the different sides, and I know that I'm getting my information from sources that tend to favor a Christian or Jewish narrative. And by 2007, we have enough of the war on terror and Islamophobia issues in the air that I just think I need to be careful with what I'm presenting and endorsing here. Okay. So I can make these available on a document on my website if you'd like to. It might be easier to look at them that way. And I'm seeing some chatter over here about where were some of the other. Thank you, Little Purple Riding Hood, for putting that specifically. Thank you, the catastrophe. Yes. Someone else was asking what were some of the other options, and yes, Argentina was one of the options. There was also some wide open space in the central part of the United States, like central western space that we don't want to live in, so someone else can live there, kind of like what people on this continent did to the native peoples, brushing them off into the places that are hardest to live in. It would have been something like that. Okay. So there are several pages of suggestions of things to look into. This artist, Emily Jessier, I hope that's how she pronounced her name, really, really impressive. And one of her big projects was acknowledging the numerous villages that were emptied with Operation Broom. She's done other things as well, but anyway, I'm just sharing these. Some of these came from recommendation from a colleague of mine her father was Palestinian scholar, really interesting people. I knew her from one of my teaching positions. So these are recommendations of hers. I've only read the Lemon Tree off of this. I've probably watched a couple of these now, but I haven't watched them all. But Stones Cry Out is, again, no, you got to know the bias. Stones Cry Out is one I have watched. And it is from the perspective of Palestinian Christians who are now, and some of them are now living in Bethlehem. All kinds of interesting things going on here. It's just so much more complicated than people think. One of the maps that I showed came from Bible History Online. Felt like I should point that out. And then most of the references for my presentation came from the UN website. So that's my presentation. I imagine there were some things I wanted to point out that I forgot to, but I think that's enough for now. I hope there was something helpful for you in this. I will make those resources available. I'm gonna go create the document right now. Let me go ahead and, um, jennifergracebird.com is my website, and I will it's when I reference something in a live stream, I put it that I'm gonna make available on my website, it's always under the podcast tab. So if you go to the podcast tab on my website, you'll see at the top that, "Hey, I've partnered for a podcast called Wild Olive, Game-Changing Conversation about Literature, Culture, and the Bible." And then if you keep scrolling down, you'll see articles or resources that I've referenced in various live conversations, story time, things like that, that I wanna make available. So I'll make that available. I'll also put the link to it in my community tab here on YouTube. And what else? Were there any You're welcome, Little Purple Riding Hood. Any major questions that I didn't notice as we went through that people want me to address at this point? There's a lot. I know that, and I'm seeing a lot of important content, I'm not seeing any I didn't miss any super chats. So I'm gonna just hang out here for a second, see if thanks. Yep. Oh dear. Thank you for being here. If you found this helpful, I would love it if you would like the video because it helps others who are interested in similar content to find it. So when you like a video or subscribe or share a link with a friend, it's a bit of a win-win. We're all, it's great for everybody. And I do appreciate it. I am grateful that some of you wanted to be here, were able to be, and wanted to be here live. And I'm grateful to those of you who watch later. I appreciate all of the ways that you support me. And if you want to know more about, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok as well. I have a Patreon page. You can find all of that information on my website, which I did include in the chat, jennifergracebird.com. So thanks for being here, folks. And next week I have a live. Oh, there is. Thank you for the super sticker. Thank you for that, Anida. Next week is a very interesting conversation with Dr. Cheryl Anderson. And I am going to, we'll end it with that.